I've been hearing all day, Moses is dead. That was said many, many thousands of years ago. Moses, my servant, is dead.
Yeah.
Yet today it seems that, well, down through the ages, that's had to be repeated over and over and over to every generation. Yet we have come to such a time when there are literally masses of people who are beginning to understand that statement. Yeah. Moses is dead. Yeah. We're just beginning to realize that we really have been freed from the law of sin and death. You know, the Old Testament, let's mention somewhat of the Old Testament today and the concepts that we have and some of the precepts that are in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is probably the best example we have of a people who were living by the knowledge of good and evil. Yep. In fact, God himself appears, now I say appears, that he's a God of good and evil in the Old Testament. Because if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 28, you'll see that it was told the people that if you obey my commandments and do all, that I tell you to do, then there's about 15 verses of blessings for you. I mean, and that's all you have to do, is just obey the Lord, and you'll be blessed in your cattle, your children will be blessed, your fields will be blessed, your purses will be blessed, everything will be blessed. And all you have to do is live a good life and do what I tell you to do. But if you don't do that, if you don't do what you're told, instead of getting 15 verses of blessings, you're going to get about 60 verses of cursings. That's the tree of good and evil. And that's why it's so important for us to realize that Moses is dead. In fact, in the Gospel of John, the first chapter, it says that the law came by Moses. But grace and reality came through Jesus Christ. So we've been seeing for some time now that there are two men on the earth, Adam and Christ. Now, in times past, when we got into the rapture thing, we were told that one of these men was going to leave the earth. In fact, it said, the scriptures say that two men in a bed, one was taken and the other left. Somebody said, now wait a minute, if there's two men in a bed, there ain't neither one of them going. But one of those men is leaving the earth. And it's not Christ, it's Adam. And I'll never forget when I first began to realize this, and I never had heard anybody preach it or anybody tell me, when I realized that both of those men, Adam and Christ, were, representatives of the carnal being and the spiritual being. And that the carnal being, the one who is disobedient, the one who is lawless, everything in our being that's not according to godliness, that is what's being taken away. So there really is a rapture. I'll never forget when I first saw this. I was sitting in my office one Sunday morning before I was to bring a message, and I was reading about the rapture because I'd been studying it, and I just saw, now wait a minute, it's the wicked that was taken off the earth. And before I preached that, we had a lady in our church, she'd been coming for a few weeks, and she told me the first time she ever heard me speak, she said, "Oh, Pastor Gary." She said, sitting there listening to you, she said, it's like sitting at the feet of the Apostle Paul. She must have told me that for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. until I saw that the wicked were being taken off the earth. So I got up that Sunday morning and I shared how in the days of Noah it was the wicked taken off the earth. It wasn't the righteous. And that the meek will inherit the earth. That woman who thought she was sitting at the feet of the Apostle Paul now thought she was being deceived by an angel of light. But see, that's how our minds go. And you know what? There are still very few people today who are not seeing through eyes of good and evil. Remember what Des said this morning? Anything that is not eternal is temporal. And anything that is temporal, it really isn't real. And it's going to fade away. For we what? Look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are unseen. Well, what do we see today? Well, we see an accountant sitting over here. We see a pharmacist. We see a preacher sitting there at the camera. And we see prostitutes and we see gays and but you know what? God only sees one thing. If we could only get this through our, well, it's not going to come to our mentality, but if we can get this, if Christ can raise up within our being to where we stop looking with these eyes of good and evil, we will see only Christ.
Yes.
That's what's happening. There is a group of people today, you might say a group consciousness arising on the earth that is beginning to realize that they cannot see through these natural eyes and become judges and critics and see through good and evil. And so we're beginning to understand that all men have that seed of Christ within them. Yet, for 2,000 years, you know, there's been a lot of ministry in recent years that says, well, God is recovering the early church. In fact, there's a lot of people who are trying, you know, to bring that restoration back to the early church. But I have to ask, why would we ever want to go back to the early church? It didn't make it. With all of the understanding and the revelation that they had, they were still led into great darkness and deception. Why is that? There has never been such a clear word that divides the soul and the spirit as there is today on the earth. Because we always thought that the wicked were those guys out there and that we were the righteous. We've been born again and we're the seed of God, but all those wicked people. And that's why so many Christians are still so fearful of this thing they call hell. Because they know, most Christians know, there's still something in them that is not worthy of going to that place that they call heaven. And so, all of the scriptures that seemingly talk about God's judgment, and I'm not saying God doesn't judge, I'd rather say he corrects.